Stardew Valley is literally doing the same chores every day, and millions of us can't stop playing it. So why do we complain when other games feel repetitive? So I think the first thing that we need to mention here is that repetition isn't always a bad thing. Humans naturally enjoy patterns and predictable loops. Repetition helps us enter a flow state, relaxing, absorbing, almost meditative. And many beloved games rely on repetition. Stardew Valley has daily routines, farming loops. I think the great thing about Stardew Valley is you can select exactly what you want to do on that given day. You're creating your own routine. But Stardew Valley isn't the only game that does this. Online shooters are a big market for this. Look at Call of Duty, for example, Apex Legends. The same maps, same modes, and the same goals. And actually, one core loop that a lot of people enjoy is playing these same game modes and improving as they play. It might be something that they're personally doing, or it might be something they've learned about the map. The point is, the only way to learn is through repetition, like most things in life. In fact, I could even take this outside of the kind of gaming space here and talk about my YouTube journey. When I started creating content on my main channel, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to talk to a camera, I didn't know how to record my voice properly, and it wasn't just the tools, it was me. Fundamentally, I had to learn by doing, and through repetition, I improved. And of course, there's also cozy games. I believe the reason why cozy games are so enjoyable are because fundamentally they are repetitive games. You're doing repetitive tasks, and that brings a sense of comfort. And there are other games out there that use repetition as their core gameplay loops. This is an incredibly unpopular opinion, but one of my favorites are Ubisoft. I mean, yeah, these guys get a really bad name for themselves, and those arguments are totally valid, but we're not here to talk about that today. Maybe another day. But there are so many Ubisoft games that I absolutely adore, and they have core gameplay loops, which inherently are repetitive. From the top of my head, I can think of Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, for example, The Division, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry. But for me, they scratch that particular itch that I absolutely love about video games and getting into a flow state. So let's think about this from a psychological standpoint. The brain loves predictability. It reduces cognitive load. Repetition gives dopamine through mastery. As you get better at a given loop, it feels good. And familiar loops create comfort, routine, and flow. So let's look at the opposite of that. What happens if we have too much unpredictability? Well, sometimes this can feel a little overwhelming or even stressful. Repetition only becomes a problem when it feels meaningless, not when it's frequent. And actually, I have a perfect example of this. I've spoken before about how I'm not a huge fan of Souls games. And I'm not here to say that Souls games are bad at all. If you like that sort of stuff, great, more power to you. But for me, doing the same core loop, dying, starting from the beginning, and realizing I'm not making any movement forward, to me is frustrating. However, if I'm grinding in a game, doing repetitive actions, but I'm gaining XP, I'm unlocking new levels that are going to help me in the long term. Now that doesn't feel meaningless to me personally. And I guess that's the interesting thing, isn't it? My opinion on the Souls games is an unpopular one. So one person's opinion on repetition could fit completely different from someone else. Defining what repetition looks for you is more important above all else. So why do modern games feel more repetitive? Or so the online conversation seems to be. I do believe that there is a lot of open world bloat now. We have huge maps filled with repetitive activities. My cousin mentioned this to me the other day. We were talking about Tom Clancy and the many different games that come underneath that name. But I mentioned how I absolutely loved Wildlands. And he said for him it was like a 7 out of 10. So a decent game, but just a bit repetitive. And he said that the world is just too big. And as a result of that, he felt like he was traveling more than he was just playing the game. And this is very typical of Ubisoft's style design. Icons, checklists, similar mission structures. For me, it scratches an itch. But for my cousin, it didn't. Both views are totally valid. But this is the reason why, for example, Assassin's Creed Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla really resonated with me. And yet there's a very clear argument that those games are open world bloat. And I totally get that. And then we have live service influence. Games designed to keep you playing indefinitely. And I think the problem with this is, if you've got a game that you can play indefinitely, often you start to question, well, what's the point if there's no end in sight? If the whole process feels meaningful, then it's fine to have. But if it's indefinite, then you know you're never going to get to the end. So what do these companies do? They put in daily quests, weekly resets, battle passes. They once again play on the fear of missing out. When repetition becomes mandatory, that's the problem. Repetition should be optional. And I think that's the difference here. And I think the AAA industry has a lot to answer for here. Because they have so much money on the line, they're looking to optimize what they can put in their games. And so they want to stay safe. They don't take any risks. If you've got a massive budget, your studio needs to avoid risk wherever possible. And so if something's working and something's pulling in money, you're going to keep doing it. By no means am I agreeing with this, but if you're looking at your competition and they're pulling in money you can't even fathom, you're going to try it too. And if you don't know what game I'm talking about in particular, I'll just tell you. Fortnite. It's never been my sort of game, but these guys are the juggernauts when it comes to live service AAA design. Proven formulas that are being reused across basically all of the industry. And therefore innovation becomes incremental. But you know, the positive thing about this is look at the AA industry. These are the guys that might not have the same budget as the AAA industry, but they are taking risks and they're clearly paying off. Look at Hollow Knight Silksong, for example, or Clair Obscur Expedition 33. So if we just look at the psychology of the AAA industry, they create loops engineered around engagement metrics. Repetition can feel manipulative if not handled well. And that's exactly the problem, and is exactly the reason the AAA industry is failing. But let's flip this on its head for a minute here. Because it's not all doom and gloom. Because repetition can work beautifully. As we said before, skill mastery, Soulsborne games, repeating attempts in the same point. Again, it's not my sort of thing, but it clearly works. Fighting games is another example. Look at Mortal Kombat or Tekken. People trying to perfect combos and muscle memory. And of course, as we mentioned, the comfort games. Cozy games thriving on repetition, such as Animal Crossing or Power Wash Simulator, House Flipper, and my personal favourite, Stardew Valley. And another genre that doesn't particularly interest me, but again has this form of repetition that people love. Roguelikes. The king of roguelikes, Hades. Which, by the way, even though I don't particularly like roguelikes, I kind of want to give Hades a go. Simply because people keep raving about it, and one day I probably will. You've also got Dead Cells, Slay the Spire. The most important thing is that the core loop is strong. If the loop is fun, repetition becomes addiction. A perfect example of this is actually the Doom series. So they had the reboot. I've played Doom, the rebooted one. Then they've got Doom Eternal, which I actually own, but I'm yet to play. And we've also got Doom The Dark Ages now. I've heard they're all very different, but in terms of the core loop and repetition, that still holds. So just to summarize here, a good repetition is one where we're able to build mastery. It supports the flow state. The player themselves choose to repeat. It has variation or progression and feels rewarding. On the other hand, you have bad repetition. It feels like filler content, artificial padding. The game forces you to continue repeating and there's no evolution and it feels like a chore. So the question is, why do players notice repetition more today? Is it that games are just more repetitive now, or is it something else? Well, one thing that's glaringly obvious is that there's more games today than ever before. Patterns are therefore easier to spot. Social media amplifies criticism. And this one's really important for me, especially when I talk about Ubisoft, because the general consensus online is that Ubisoft is a terrible company. And I'm not going to argue this case, but what I am going to say is that every single time I've picked up an Ubisoft game, I've sat down to play it and thoroughly enjoyed myself. And so it just scratches that itch for me. The other thing is games are longer now, and so repetition becomes more obvious. And then we've also got a little bit of internal bias here, which is that nostalgia hides how repetitive older games actually were. Seriously, go back to some of your childhood favorites and you'll see there's definitely repetition there. We just choose to overlook that. My personal take is that I enjoy relaxing flow state repetition, and I don't need constant novelty. I prefer games that let me unwind rather than overwhelm myself. Repetition is only a problem when it's boring, not when it's present. At the end of the day, repetition isn't what makes a game good or bad. It's how it makes us feel. Some loops calm us, some challenge us, some remind us why we fell in love with gaming in the first place. Games don't have to reinvent themselves every second to be meaningful. Sometimes the familiar rhythms are exactly what we need. And if a game gives you comfort, joy, or a moment to breathe, then that repetition isn't a flaw. It's a gift. So maybe the real magic isn't in avoiding repetition, but in finding the loops that make us feel at home. Thank you so much for watching this week's video. If you enjoyed this episode, check out this video here, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.